Joining me now to look at the week in federal politics are two members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery, Ian Bailey of the Globe and Mail and Tonda MacCharles of the Toronto Star. First of all, both of you, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Hi, Martin.
Now, Tonda, you are at the site of the inquiry, the Emergencies Act Inquiry, and we're going to get to that subject first in a minute. But first, let's talk about the economy, which is very much on everyone's mind, a looming recession. I want to start with the economic update from Chrystia Freeland. Ian, you were at the lockup. You've been watching it in detail. What stood out for you in her update and in the economy in general?
Well, I was struck by Minister Freeland kind of acknowledging tough times ahead, economic challenges looming, and the government sort of weighing in and doing its best to provide some assistance. Clearly, inflation is a key topic these days. It's a political challenge for the government. The new Conservative leader and the NDP leader are pushing the government very hard on this. And so the minister had some measures on federal student and apprentice loans, and other measures to sort of help Canadians. Not a lot, but some measures. But she was very candid about the challenges that Canada faces. She held out the possibility of eventual return to a surplus. And this statement struck me as kind of a bridge to give the government something defensive, something to talk about on the inflation file, pending a budget, obviously, next year. So those were a few of the things that came out and struck me in it.
Okay, quick question on that. Is on that same note. You mentioned that she acknowledged that the things could potentially get much worse. We're talking about the possibility of a recession. Ian, just to dwell on that, how much do you think that this whole exercise could be quite outdated by what could happen in the next 9 months, which is what the Bank of Canada is predicting in terms of no growth?
Well, this buys the government time for now, and it's, as the minister said, it's hard to predict how things are going to play out, how things are going to turn. So we'll have to see how this rolls out. But for now, I guess this gives the government buys them some time, depending how things turn out in the coming months. Okay,
Tonda, watching the economic update and the economic indicators that we've been watching, what do you make of it all?
Well, look, I think the political pivot in the messaging of the government is interesting, right? They're really, I think, trying to make Canadians to get ready for a much more difficult period ahead. And that's not, no government likes to talk about bad times ahead, and they always like to downplay that. She's not Mary Poppins. I mean, the spoonful of sugar that went with that medicine yesterday wasn't a whole lot. It was very targeted relief. But I was also interested overall in the fact that this government is trying somehow to sort of kickstart Canadian companies and the economy here in terms of that green transition, and also to try and up its competitiveness with American companies and the American fiscal picture. It seems that they're really feeling the heat and the pressure south of the border for the Canadian economy and the ability of our industries to compete with all the incentives that are being brought south of the border.
Okay. And now, Tonda, I mentioned you were at the site of the inquiry, the Emergencies Act Inquiry. All week long we have been hearing, well, most of the week we've been hearing from key organizers and spokespersons of the occupation of downtown Ottawa. What stands out for you in the testimony we've been watching this week?
Well, a few things. We've heard all week long about the factions and the divisions and the power struggles within various groups at the convoy. That was underlined over and over again, in a way to downplay that this was some kind of monolithic group that could have been negotiated with. But also, on the convoy side, for them to promote it as an organic, peaceful, peace-loving event that didn't harm anybody, and that was really, whatever harms Ottawa experienced were exaggerated. So that stood out for me. What also really is standing out for me, though, now after almost a week of this, well, I guess we have still a long day ahead of testimony, but in this, because I'm speaking to you just before that, I think what stands out is also the leeway that the judge and the inquiry and the commission counsel are giving the convoy organizers and participants. Leeway that was not given to Ottawa residents and businesses, nor really to police. None of the evidence was led on, or very little of that evidence was led at this inquiry. And there's a lot of space being given to the convoy participants to talk about their perspective on events. We have learned, to a certain extent, a little bit more about the challenge police negotiators faced in dealing with those divided factions.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how much more we've learned about the necessity of the Emergencies Act being invoked.
Okay, Ian, you covered, and we all lived through the occupation of downtown Ottawa, and you've been seeing some of this this testimony from organizers and protesters. On to Tonda's point too, we also today on Friday saw a lot of video played in sort of a counterpart to what the organizers were saying. They played a lot of video showing the kind of noise and disruption in the streets of Ottawa. What are you making of what you've been seeing this week?
Well, you know, I think that for many Canadians, or some Canadians anyway, what happened in Ottawa may seem very far away or very distant from them. What struck me in this phase of the inquiry, and I think we're a long way from the sort of conclusion about whether the Emergencies Act was justified. We're a long way, or maybe not a long way, but I think when the ministers and the Prime Minister testifies, maybe the tone of the inquiry will change. But what strikes me is that there are lessons here, I think, for Canadians across the country in challenges police face dealing with these kinds of incidents, challenges managing these kinds of incidents. There are obviously concerning disclosures about allegations of police assisting protesters and such. I think there's a lot for Canadians to learn. I mean, there could be incidents not necessarily exactly like this, but other similar public disorder incidents in other Canadian cities. And I think that what we've heard this week and what we're hearing is very concerning. It's something for all Canadians to take note of, because these kinds of incidents could occur elsewhere in Canada.
Okay, Tonda, last in 30 seconds, what are you watching for in the weeks to come? Obviously, things will change. We'll have a different set of testimonies starting next week.
I think that the inquiry is now going to turn its mind to what was going on at the Windsor Ambassador Bridge, what was going on in Toronto at Queen's Park, what was going on in Coutts, Alberta. We'll hear evidence about how the solidarity actions and protests were unfolding in other areas across the country, the challenge it posed to authorities there, what they learned from the Ottawa handling or mishandling of the protest here. And that'll all come sort of heading into a discussion around what the Ontario provincial government officials thought and saw and what they did in response, and whether, and then, you know, eventually, I guess in a few weeks, we'll get to the picture, the federal picture, and what was going on in the minds of cabinet ministers at the time.
It all wraps up in the last week, we've been told, well, yeah, with the federal ministers and the Prime Minister. Listen, both of you, thank you very much for taking the time, and have a good weekend.
Same to you.
Thanks, Martin.